Hello, APUSHers. We are going to address the early republic, starting with the national government under the Articles of Confederation after it has won the Revolutionary War. So let's start with, well, the United States has declared independence. It thinks it is free. It will earn that legitimacy when it negotiates the Treaty of Paris in 1783. It will also be recognized by France as part of the alliance during the war. But in the meantime, what now? You're a free, sovereign, independent nation. How are you going to handle the policies now? How are you going to handle your protection? How are you going to handle the war? How are you going to handle the national issues? The relationships between the 13 sovereign states who consider themselves pretty much independent nations. And they don't really get along. They do have a common cause. But since they are each sovereign and free and independent, they have to set up their own new governments now. So here's what they're going to do. They are going to pretty much dissolve their colonial charters and draft through conventions new state constitutions. To give you an idea, the state constitutions will follow a typical format. It's not going to be the same. Each state will have its different parameters and policies and powers and limits and structures. But typically, as I said, they will have a preamble, which outlines the purpose of the government, basically outlining the principles that the revolution is fighting for. Then we have a section on the Declaration of Rights. This is where the state constitutions will enumerate the liberties and the civil rights that are protected by this new state government. Understand that the state constitution will not establish that the government grants these rights. Remember, these liberties are inherent to the individual. The state constitutions will guarantee them, that the governments under these state constitutions are obligated to protect them. And by enumerating them in these state constitutions, it further guarantees that through these written constitutions. And then the next section or final section would be the frame of government. When a government is established, how will it be structured? What are going to be the powers? What are going to be the limits? What are going to be the relationships between institutions? Are we going to have separation of powers and checks and balances? Are we going to have a predominant legislative branch? Is the executive branch going to exist, or is it going to be subservient to this state legislature? How will they be chosen? How will they be elected? How will they enforce, interpret, and create these new laws and policies for the respective states? That's the general outline for these two state constitutions. Massachusetts will hold this convention and pretty much dump it on John Adams. He returns from being ambassador to Great Britain. Very awkward job to have when you're fighting against the British as part of the revolution. But he's done a great job representing the interests of the United States with the Dutch and the British. And he's going to come back, and the Massachusetts State Convention is going to basically like, hey, John, thanks for all you've done through all these years. Create a constitution. He'll do this as part of a committee, but he's basically going to do most of the work. And his result is going to be a template for, spoiler alert, the United States Constitution. If anything, the delegates at the Constitution Convention are just going to be like, hey, let's look what John did. Did you see what John Adams wrote in the Massachusetts? I said we just roll with that. Let's just go with that. You know, a little paraphrasing here and there. How should we put it? Inspired by the Massachusetts State Constitution as drafted, primarily by John Adams. Okay, so we got that going on. And here's a little interesting tidbit. Here's an excerpt from the Georgia State Constitution. As you can see, ratified in 1777, so pretty much a year after the Declaration of Independence. Let's look at number 9 here. All male white inhabitants of the age of 21 years and possessed in his own right of 10 pounds value and liable to pay tax in the state, or being of any mechanic trade. Well, According to the Georgia state constitution, if anyone wants to vote, they have to be male, they have to be white, they do have to inhabit the state. There's even a residency requirement. They have to be 21 years old, and they still need property. We go back to, I have this question that says, was the revolution revolutionary? And we still see that in some of these state constitutions, property requirements are still on the books. Some state constitutions actually dissolve the state property requirement, but not Georgia and several others. So that's still on the books. But let's go to that final article that we see there, Article 11. No person shall be entitled to more than one vote, which shall be given in the county. Okay, so one vote. Nor shall any person who holds any title of nobility be entitled to a vote, or be capable of serving as a representative, or hold any post of honor, profit, or trust in the state, while such person claims his title of nobility. We're getting away from nobility. We're getting away from these inherent titles. Perhaps that is revolutionary. That is something to consider as part of how revolutionary the revolution is. We have property requirements for anyone to vote. However, they're prohibiting anyone from holding office or even voting if they want to hold on to these titles of nobility. We're getting away from that social construct here. Okay. There's a national government now. The 13 states, even though they consider themselves sovereign, have decided to form a national government as part of a common cause, right? Common defense. They are going to unite against the Great Britain in regards to earning their freedom. They're going to negotiate with foreign powers such as France, Spain, the Dutch, but they're also going to conduct this war. So we have to facilitate the national government some way. We need to be able to put this on paper. So the Second Continental Congress drafts the Articles of Confederation. And as you can see in the preamble, they literally list each and every state. So this tells you what? What could you infer for this? They are recognizing each sovereign state. There's no missing out on this. They're like states. Look at Article 2. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States. Without question, each state is sovereign, it's free, and it's independent. And then in Article 3, the states enter in a firm legal friendship. I love it. It's so adorable. They're friends. Aw, isn't that cute? Wow, they hate each other. But as you see, for their common defense, the security of their liberties, mutual and general welfare, they have common interests, that is, in dealing with the foreign sector, the international affairs, conducting the war against Great Britain, negotiating with France, Spain, other powers, to prevent any invasion. That is their common ground here. And they want to reiterate that, however, each state is sovereign, free, and independent. And they really want to hold on to that. As you can see, the Articles of Confederation are going to have a weak, that's how we can describe the Articles of Confederation, the national government of the Articles of Confederation. Weak, absolutely weak, very weak. Best descriptor we can go with. So we're gonna play a little video here from NBC Learn. I want you to pay attention to it, right?
The state governments loved the Articles of Confederation because the Articles of Confederation created a government that had very few powers. A lot of times students come to the conclusion that the Articles of Confederation are weak, but in fact what they were restrictive, and they fit perfectly the goals of the American Revolution. The goal of the Revolution was for local elected legislatures to govern the people. People didn't think of themselves as Americans or citizens of the United States. They thought of themselves as Virginians, Marylanders, Connecticut men and women, Massachusetts people. And they were really fighting a war when they said no taxation without representation. They were fighting a war so that their elected officials in their governments could govern them. So when they create the first national government, they create a government that comes out of their revolutionary goals, which is no tyrant. We've just fought against King George, who we've called a tyrant. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen? You have no executive branch in the national government. Most powers preserved for the states. Don't let a distant government. In the 18th century, if the government was located in New York, that was 1,000,000 miles away from Georgia or South Carolina, because there were no planes or telephones or Amtrak or anything that would make it possible to get there quickly. You probably could get to England by ocean faster than you could get from Georgia to New York or to Philadelphia by horseback. And so no distant government with strong powers. Local government with strong powers, very much state power. And so the Articles of Confederation are by choice, that is, by the choice of the revolutionaries, very limited. They don't have the power to tax, which colonists and early Americans thought was the most powerful right a government had. They don't have the power really to create an army. They don't have the power to regulate commerce or to coin money, make a uniform currency. All of this was going to be power that the state governments had. And so, in effect, the Articles of Confederation meet the goals of the revolution. The problem is that when the revolution's over and you're governing a new nation, the Articles of Confederation turn out to be grossly inadequate to actually be a national government. And there are revolutionaries who realize this pretty quickly. There are men like Hamilton, Madison, Washington, who say, wait a minute, those were really good goals for the war, but the United States is not going to survive with such a, they didn't call it a weak government, they called it an unvigorous government, without a energetic government. And so you have to think about the Articles of Confederation as in some ways the result of revolutionary fervor. And then after the revolution is over and you see what's needed to keep a country going, a nation going, this growing sense that you need a much stronger national government.
That is actually an interesting point about the Articles of Confederation by the historian. Did the Articles of Confederation reflect the revolutionary ideals to break away from Great Britain? Well, let's think about that. Why are they breaking away from Great Britain? Is Great Britain, Parliament, the King, is this a strong central government? Yes. Have they been imposing upon the will of the colonists, upon the rights and liberties of the colonists? According to the Patriots, yes. Therefore, when they create the Articles of Confederation, I think it could be understandable that they would create a quote unquote weak national government. They don't want a strong one. They don't want to empower it any further than it could be. There is no executive, as in no king. There is no judiciary, as in none of these vice admiralty courts that make decisions based on the biases and influences of the executive or the king, right? Or even parliamentary law. No regulation of commerce, which no limited taxation, can't tax at all. Makes sense, right? No taxation without representation. A major rallying cry of the revolution. And here's the Articles of Confederation, here's this national government that can't do much of any of that. But that was the case, right? Empower the states, the individual, sovereign, independent states. Make it extremely difficult to pass any legislation, need a supermajority to pass any bill, need unanimous consent from the states to change the Articles of Confederation. Is it difficult? Is it restrictive, as was mentioned? Yes, but on purpose, right? Can we understand why the Second Continental Congress, those that are responsible for conducting the war, conducting the Revolutionary War, to fulfill these priorities and ideals of the Declaration of Independence that they drafted, that they passed, that they sent to Parliament, to the King, it's understandable that they would create this Articles of Confederation, this weak national government. Yeah, totally understood.
The state government.
Sorry. Now, is there any good that comes out of the Articles of Confederation? Absolutely, without question. Cannot, take away anything when it comes to the Northwest Territory, or specifically the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So let's watch this another clip from NBC News Learn and pay attention to this.
In 1787, the Second Continental Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, adopted a plan to control the vast amounts of territory in the Ohio region. This plan, referred to as the Northwest Ordinance, would allow new states to form within the territory and be admitted to the Union. For this plan to succeed, it would depend on the cooperation of the other states to give up previous claims to the area.
The Articles of Confederation are actually written in 1776 and don't get ratified till 1781, and that's because no one's going to ratify it until everybody gives up their western land. The Confederation leaders do an amazing thing. They make a rule that these territories will have the right to become states that have equal standing in the United States with the original 13 states.
The Northwest Ordinance determined how the land would be distributed in these territories and how the territorial governments should be set up. Once the population of any of the territorial subdivisions reached 60,000 settlers, it would be made a state. Because the federal government would then own the territory, it could sell the land to proprietors for settling and development, thus bringing in money to help pay back the massive national debt accrued from the Revolutionary War. One critical decision that was made in the Northwest Ordinance was that slavery would be banned in all of the new territories. However, the Native Americans living within the territories were poorly treated by the new American settlers.
The Indians who live there are, in fact, denied their rights in the Northwest Ordinances. They are not acknowledged as citizens of the United States or as participants in these territories.
The Northwest Ordinance gave the new growing country a stronger sense of unity and proved to be one of the major accomplishments of the government under the Articles of Confederation.
So, yes, the Northwest Ordinance is, I agree, it is an amazing accomplishment under the Articles of Confederation without question. I think you have to see the wonderful points that are established from that video. One, that the Northwest Ordinance establishes a precedent for statehood. It breaks down how new states can be formed through a particular process. They give you some parameters, right? Reaching a population of 60,000. There are other conditions if you read the Northwest Ordinance you see on the screen. But without question, think about it. On equal footing with the original states in all respects whatever. That's awesome. That when the new state is formed out of this Northwest Territory, right? Let's consider two awesome circumstances here. One, that the original states that had claim to that land give it up. See on the map, ceded by Massachusetts, ceded by Connecticut. There's going to be, Virginia's going to cede. I mean, these states decide, fine, I'll give it up. And that when a state is carved from that territory, it will become equal to the original state. That's great. That's fantastic. How is this revolutionary, perhaps? Because they're not treated like colonies. They will not be treated second class. Any new state is going to be embraced as an equal, unlike how Britain treated and established and treated its colonies across the Atlantic, and at least through some perceptions, treated them as second class. So right off the bat here, the Northwest Ordinance sets up a pretty enlightened position here and claim. So if you continue, there are also other conditions that these new states, when they decide to establish themselves as territories and then, of course, apply for statehood, there are these other conditions, as in, you see here in Article 3, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Promoting public education, promoting religion. Why an emphasis on public education? We want the next generation to understand Republican principles and the ideals of the revolution. Why religion and morality? We want good citizens, good moral citizens to be fostered in this territory. Again, we're starting from scratch here in this Northwest Territory from the point of view of the delegates here in the Articles of Confederation and national government. We want to start off really, really good based on these enlightened principles that we fought a revolution for, that we want to continue to promote as we move on in our life, in our future. That's awesome. That is really cool. Recognizing private property and their property rights and liberties shall never be invaded or disturbed. It does say that the natives, they're not going to respect that. But private property in regards to the American settlers that establishes themselves in these territories, which eventually will become states, yes, they will recognize that fundamental right. And then comes Article 6. There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory. Well, that seems pretty progressive. And wow, hold on. We have some questions. Where does this come from? Why would they even include this in the article? And why, remember, we need 9 of 13 states to pass this law. Remember, the Articles of Confederation, we have the Northwest Ordinance. This is proposed legislation, needs supermajority, 9 out of 13. That means you're going to need some slave states in on this, right? Especially from the South. You gotta have them on board with this. And why will they be on board? Because it does pass. Why? Why, oh why, is the Northwest Territory going to have this condition that no slavery in the said territory? Well, let's go back to who laid claim, who's going over there prior to all this and settling. Where are they coming from? You can see that it says ceded by Massachusetts. Wasn't exactly dependent on the institution of slavery as a colony. Will be one of the first states to abolish slavery in its state constitution. Connecticut, similar to Massachusetts. The settlers that arrive in the Northwest Territory are going to be originating from the New England, the northern section of the country. And they do not abide by slavery. They're going to come, they're going to say, we're going to do this on their own. So there is a social and cultural foundation being established in the Northwest Territory already. But now we have to ask ourselves, why does the South, why do Southern states decide we're in on this? Why would they adopt that? Why would they be okay with that? One explanation is competition. Good old economic competition. By prohibiting slavery in the Northwest Territory, we know that this is going to be agricultural based, plenty of land to establish plantations, especially along the Ohio River. There's the Ohio River, in case we're not sure. Right along there, you see where it says Virginia, right to the west, and boom, there's a major Ohio River. They set up some plantations on there. But these also have plantations. The southern states also have plantations, and that could be economic competition. So by prohibiting slavery in the Northwest Territory, these potential plantation owners, these potential small farmers would have to pay wages, would have to do the work on their own, and that could provide the established southern plantations and southern farmers an advantage, an economic and financial advantage to limit competition in regards to their own supply of raw materials and cash crops. So interesting, but why not extend this to south of the Ohio River? Well, let's not push the envelope here. And could we make an argument that doesn't this foster the division between the United States, within the United States, between North and South, the Ohio River? I mean, we had the Mason-Dixon line, right? You see Delaware, Maryland, between Pennsylvania, that Mason-Dixon line. We extend it to the Ohio River, and as we move along in the course, yeah, that line is definitely going to become much more apparent. Could the Northwest Ordinance have potentially exacerbated the sectional division between those that are against slavery and those that are for slavery? Something to consider as we move along the course. Think about it. Think about it. All right. What happened? Sorry. I want to get back to this. All right, we're gonna handle this in another way, but yes, there is massive debt to consider. There's war debt. There's debt that existed even before the war. There are some issues. We will get into the bad on this, but I think what exposes the weakness, quote unquote weakness of the Articles of Confederation is, yes, Shay's rebellion. So let's watch this clip from NBC Learn.
The Revolutionary War left American states in debt. To raise money, legislators raised taxes. This angered poor farmers and war veterans to the point where they formed a rebellion and almost caused a civil war in Massachusetts. Daniel Shays, a former captain in the Continental Army, led the protest, which came to be known as Shay's Rebellion. In the summer of 1786, several thousand of Shay's followers prevented tax collection and used force to keep debtors out of prison. They headed to Springfield to seize weapons, intending to force the Boston legislature to change the law. Massachusetts residents were terrified. The legislature realized it was powerless. The Continental Army had been disbanded after the Revolutionary War, and the federal government had no money for new troops. Finally, wealthy merchants in Boston agreed to raise an army of over 4,000 militia to fight Shay's men.
These men were talking about forming a new country out there. There's no telling what might have happened. If Shay's rebellion had flourished, if these guys had been able to grab all those guns and that arsenal and armed a big army, it would have been a very bad thing for the country. The people in Boston sort of put together a 4,000-man army and marched across western Massachusetts and basically blew Daniel Shays and his friends away. They all ran for their lives when they saw these guys coming at them.
Shays and his troops were eventually pardoned, and Massachusetts began to offer tax and debt relief. Locally, this clash was anticlimactic, but Shay's rebellion had momentous consequences for the nation. It highlighted a weakness in the Articles of Confederation, which didn't give Congress the right to establish or fund an army.
The impact of Shay's rebellion was convincing people that we had to have a really strong federal government. Washington, and now I say to Hamilton, and a lot of other people said, this proves that we've got to have a new Constitution.
The Shay's Rebellion is instrumental in inspiring those to change the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation into the Constitution. So I want to take a quick glance over here to primary source, this speech at local meeting in Massachusetts by Paul Jogger, a Massachusetts farmer. And as you can see here, I've labored hard all my days and fared hard. I have been greatly abused. I've been obliged to do more than my part in the war. Been loaded with class rates, town rates, province rates, continental rates, and all rates. Been pulled and hauled by sheriffs, constables, and collectors. Had my cattle sold for less than they were worth. I have been obliged to pay, and nobody will pay me. I have lost a great debt by this man, and that man, and the other man. And the great men are going to get all we have. And I think it is time for us to rise and put a stop to it. I have no more courts, nor sheriffs, nor collectors, nor lawyers. And I know that we are the biggest party. Let them say what they will. We've come to relieve the distresses of the people. There will be no court until they have redress of their grievances. Pretty strong. But let's understand his perspective. Okay? So I've been obliged to do more than my part in the war. We can assume, just like Daniel Shay is, veteran of the revolution. They were promised to be paid. The national government has been struggling to pay salaries and pensions of the revolutionary veterans. And these revolutionary veterans made sacrifices. They made sacrifices to leave their farms, to leave their businesses, to fight for the glorious cause. And they were promised payment, and they have yet to get it. And they come back home. They have to recuperate their losses. They are still waiting for income. And New England is going through an economic recession. We could even call it a depression. It's becoming much more of a financial hardship and struggle for these Massachusetts farmers out west. And the law and the government are not being sympathetic. The foreclosures are happening through the court system, the state court systems of Massachusetts. They're in debt. They're unable to pay their interest, their principal, and the courts are ordering that their properties, that their assets be seized as means of payment. You see here where Paul Jogger talks about how he's been pulled and hauled by sheriffs, constables who are enforcing the law. They're enforcing the foreclosures. These tax collectors, these debt collectors, they confiscate his assets, like his cattle, and they sell it for whatever they can get out of it because they want to be repaid. They want debt paid back. And he says, like, I've been forced to pay back, but where is my pension? Where is my salary for fighting in the war? When can I force that? And he's got to pay this man, he's got to pay that man, he's got to pay this man. He's indebted here because he's just trying to survive. He's just trying to hold on to his farm, his property, which I think for anyone in this day and age in 1786 would be genuinely concerned about holding on to their farm because that is their property and that's what allows them to vote. There's a great concern here. And interesting, he's all like, time for us to rise. Wow. Rise against who? You saw, right? Eastern merchants, Eastern bankers, Eastern elites. It's the good old West versus East argument again. It's similar to Bacon's Rebellion. Disgruntled, angry Western farmers who are dealing with more of the problems, while the Eastern elites, the large landowning elites, are dominating the state government or the colonial government back in Bacon's Rebellion and imposing their will and on these Western farmers who feel that they're the ones obligated to deal with all these problems, while the Eastern elites bask in their wealth and their glory. And they've had it here in Massachusetts. Paul Jogger and Daniel Shay, they've had it. And so they're going to put a stop to it. And they're the biggest party, meaning they're the majority. What are we seeing here? We're seeing justification. Who are we going after? No more courts, so we can stop the foreclosures. Nor sheriffs, nor collectors, nor lawyers, right? These elites, those in power, those imposing these, what they believe are unfair policies on these poor Western farmers, these indebted Western farmers. And they come to relieve the distress of the people. It's a cause now. Interesting how there will be no court until they reach it. Shutting down the court, shutting down a legal institution until their grievances have been addressed. Okay, question. Where do we side on this? Is this a glorious cause by the Western farmers? Or are these anarchists, are these radicals who are violating the law, who are violating the principle of the rule of law? Or, again, going back to, are they justified in their actions? Are they listing their grievances as similarly and analogous to the Declaration of Independence. Where do we stand? Where do we go here? Where's the perspective? Now we know that the rebellion will be quashed. As mentioned in the video, it's anticlimactic, but it does expose the weakness of the national government. They couldn't act. They could not support Massachusetts. Massachusetts called for help, and the national government said, we cannot. Why? Because it's dependent on the other states. It's the other states that have to agree by a supermajority to grant revenue to pay for an army, to agree to establish an army to deal with the situation. And because they're 13 free, sovereign, independent states, they look at it as, that's a Massachusetts problem. That's not a me problem. That's a you problem, Massachusetts. I'm Virginia. I have my own problem. I'm handling my own problem. I don't need to handle your problems. No. We're good. That's on you. That's the mentality. That's how they're looking. And the national government is in no position, has no power, relatively speaking, to address the concerns of the Massachusetts legislature, the Massachusetts state government. And it's not just in Massachusetts. There are brewing situations in other states. And this is what is going to fuel the concerns of those like Alexander the Man Hamilton, George Washington, James Madison, and they wanna call a convention and see about how we can address these issues. Okay, let's go back here. So we have State Rebellion. I keep doing this. All right. So what are we gonna do about it? Who's gonna show up here? Okay. Well, real quick. Let's go here. We're going to skip over to this slide to efficiently cover how the Constitutional Convention is going to address the problems of the articles. So we have the articles problems and Constitution solution. All right. Okay. Under the Articles of Confederation, the national government had no power to tax, which means we cannot generate revenue, which means we cannot spend on an army, we cannot spend to the function of the government, of the national government. This causes economic and financial issues. So how do we address this? The Constitutional Convention will empower the Congress, specifically the Congress. It will enumerate the power of Congress to lay and collect taxes. Yeah, the federal government under the Constitution will be able to generate revenue so that it can finance and subsidize its functions, to be able to respond to virtually any issue that is under its jurisdiction. Awesome. Another article problem. The national government could not regulate interstate commerce between states and foreign commerce. Think about that. In economics, the key is efficiency. This is inefficient. You have 13 individual sovereign states conducting their own regulation, their own commerce code with each other. Think about how you have to be a merchant, a commerce lawyer, anybody dealing with contracts, and you have to be like, what are the interstate commerce codes for each of these 13 states with each other? Because yeah, that'd be different too. The regulations of commerce regulations with Virginia are probably not going to be the same as they are with Connecticut, as they are with Georgia, and so on and so on and so forth. Oh my God. That makes my brain hurt just thinking about that. Not to mention foreign commerce. That's 13 different foreign commerce regulation codes. Imagine being Britain, having to be like, so hold on. Do we have, so what can we do in Massachusetts? So can we do it? No, we can't do that with, I'm done. I don't want to do it. In France, same deal, Dutch, I mean, we can go on and on. Oh, well, Constitution solution, Congress will establish a uniform code for all the states, meaning Congress will have the power to regulate interstate commerce and foreign commerce. Efficiency, that makes sense. Awesome. What's happening though? that national government under the Constitution is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. Okay, article problem, no executive branch. Who enforces the law? Oh, the states have to enforce the law. Constitution establishes an executive branch under Article 2. We get the president. We're not going to get too involved into the Electoral College, which is already a complex matter. But let's understand how the Electoral College works very quickly. The number of electors for each state is dependent on their total number of representatives, which would be based on the number of representatives they have in the House, and the 2 senators each state possess. So the more population the state has, the more electors they will have. And it's a majority of the electors that determines the president. Why did they set it up this way? Why? Why is it so complex? Don't think about it. You're bringing in an executive branch. You're talking about a single person in charge of this executive branch to enforce the law. Kind of reminds some of a king, a monarch. But if it's indirectly elected, then they debated about this. Is it directly elected by the people? Is it going to be elected by Congress? Is it going to be elected by a majority of the state legislature? I mean, they decided, how about the Electoral College? And we were like, what? And we're like, well, we're just fine. Hey, that's it. But that's, it's an indirect election. The people have some say, an indirect say, but this is going to be the national representative. It will have particular powers granted to it by the Article 2 of the Constitution, but yeah, no judicial branch. Let the state courts interpret the law. That's, again, going back to efficiency, 13 different state courts and 13 different state court systems. We're going to have, the Constitution is going to establish under Article 3, the Judiciary Branch will establish a United States Supreme Court. Congress will have the power to establish the lower federal courts. That'll be up to Congress. But the United States Supreme Court will exist under the Constitution of the United States, and they get to interpret the law. And there's some concern there because we didn't have a judicial branch because of the concern over vice admiralty courts and how is the Supreme Court going to be chosen. It's going to be appointed by the president with advice and consent of the Senate. Is that acceptable to some in regards to this Constitution? Again, we're further empowering this national government. To change the Articles of Confederation, it required unanimous consent. Extremely difficult. Article 5 of the Constitution establishes the amendment process. So you need 2/3 of both houses of Congress, so 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, plus 3/4 of the state legislatures. That is a difficult process, but I think you have to appreciate that framers put in place in a process to change the Constitution, as in if there's an issue with what we've established, there's a process to fix it, to address it, or even to add on, right? We can take away, we can add on, we can modify, it's there. We're not gonna make it easy, but I think that's the point, but there is a process. And by the way, consider who is not involved in this process, directly involved in this process. One, the president does not approve or veto this amendment. So the president's out, right? In regards to the official process. The Supreme Court and the federal court systems are definitely not involved. That would be a major conflict of interest because they interpret the law and they shouldn't really have a say of what the law is going to be, right? And the people have no say in the matter, at least directly. There is no national referendum. Everybody understand that. At the federal level, there's no national referendum. There will never ever be a national vote on a law, a proposed bill, a treaty, anything like that. Are there elections held at the federal level? Yes, to elect the House of Representatives, to elect the Senate as part of the Electoral College, which will be conducted by the states. That's it. There is no national referendum ever at all. People do not have a say on what the amendment is going to be at all. No approval, no rejection, nothing. That's interesting. Consider that. And then under the article, another article problem, or final problem here that we'll look at, supermajority to pass laws, meaning 9 of the 13 states. Well, Constitution solution. We won't make it that difficult, but we won't make it that easy. So we have the presentment clause. We have 2 houses, right? We have the House of Representatives, we have the Senate. All we need is a simple majority in each house, in the House and in the Senate. They both have to agree. And as part of checks and balances, the president can sign it into law as part of the process. He can also veto it if he figures that it is in violation of the Constitution or he doesn't think that it is a legit law. So there are further powers. There are stronger powers for this national government. This federal government will definitely be a strong central government. Right? So it's the, oh, hold on, right? But there are also checks and balances. There are contingencies. Let's consider that. Right? So that is the Articles of Confederation. We are teasing toward the Constitution. Check with me in the next video in this series where we will address the Constitutional Convention and whether this Constitution is legit. As we saw, the Articles of Confederation, not so much, but will the Constitution be legit? All right, everybody. See you.